G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. We'll have all the show notes and any resources mentioned in the cast on our website. In 2005, started building a small distillery in his backyard in Hobart. 2007, filled their first cask with triple distilled Irish-style single malt whisky, which has matured 5 years later. In 2014, partnered with Sheena Estate, moved, launched an award-winning gin, took on investment and went from using a single 300-litre still at home to a 4,500 litre and 2 smaller stills. Grew from laying down 400 litres a year at home to around 100,000 litres and recently sold out of the large business to return to distilling at home. Now with a single 700-litre still, making about 8,000 litres a year. Damian recommends investing 10 to 20% of sales into marketing and find an expert to work with. Went from 1 FTE to 6 back to 1. Business and financial planning using KPIs, ensuring you're well funded and getting and keeping mentors are crucial to success. He believes the hardest thing in growing a small business is balancing the resources you plow back into the business. Advice Damian would give himself on day one is make sure you're doing something you're passionate about, is unique and has a point of difference. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Damian Mackey from Town Distillery here in sunny Hobart, Tasmania, Australia. Thanks for your time today, Damian.
Thanks, Troy. No worries.
Let's start with how we know each other. Can you remember far back where we first met?
I think when you were at Lark and particularly involved in the Tasmanian Whisky Association.
Yep, that's right. The committee there, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's where I first came across you, Troy. Yeah, good operator as far as I remember.
Thank you. And we've obviously had many drams over the years, many fine drams.
Indeed, yes.
Of which yours right up there in my top 3, I'd say, Tassie.
Thank you.
You want to tell the audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money?
Okay, we have a small whisky distillery here in Newtown in Hobart, in Tasmania. We've gone through a few iterations. We started really back in 2005 building a distillery here at our property. We've got lucky enough to have some large substantial sheds at the back of our property in Newtown. So our first distillery was Mackey's Distillery, and it was really just a spare time thing for many, many years. Whenever we had a spare weekend, we would get some barrels laid down. We were doing the whole mashing and fermenting and distilling in a very small space.
And with just one still?
With just one still, a 300-litre still, a very small mash tun, grain mill, fermenter. Took us about 13 or 14 weekends of work to lay down a 100-litre barrel.
So your capacity was about 4 casks a year?
Yes, yeah. And we couldn't work every weekend, obviously. We were raising a small family at the time. Anyway, we got some whiskey barrels laid down and eventually released our Mackey whiskey back in probably 2012, I think, might have been the first release. We didn't do the very small barrels like a lot of small distilleries do to get the aging happening faster. We stuck with 100-litre barrels.
How many years were you going for your maturation?
We let them all age for 6 years, actually. Just maybe a year longer than some others, but we felt it just needed it. Our point of difference, and I think it's important to have a point of difference, was that we were doing triple distilled single malt whisky. And I think at the time we were the only whisky distillery in Australia doing triple distilled whisky.
And it must only be 3 or 4 across Australia at the moment.
Yes. There's still just a very small number.
Out of 300 distilleries, like 1% are doing triple distilled, which is the Irish style, commonly known as a bit of an Irish style, triple distilled.
Yeah. Whilst there are a couple in Scotland that triple distill, generally it's considered to be an Irish way of making whisky, and it just produces a smoother style. The Irish would say they get all the rubbish out of it that the Scots leave in there, and the Scots would say you're taking all the interesting things out of it.
Of course they would.
The Scots leave in there. The great thing about the world of whisky is it's such a broad category in terms of styles, and there's a whisky for everyone's taste, everyone's palate. So there's plenty of room for points of difference.
Yeah, and for the audience that aren't really into the spirits industry, I guess, distilling or triple distilled means you put the wash, which is unhopped beer, into a large wash still, and then for a lot of single malt whiskies, it then goes into often a smaller still, which is called the spirit still. And for triple distilled, it goes through that spirit still a second time. So it's gone through 3 batches of stills.
Yes, basically we have a wash run, an intermediate run, and then the final spirit run. And what's called the cuts quite different for our intermediate run than if you were simply doing double distilled Scotch style whiskey. Yeah,
the wash that you just mentioned for the audience is the unhopped beer that goes into that first still, and the cuts you mean when you take the spirit coming off the still, the spirit still, usually the first, they call the heads and the tails often, so they'll say the first 2 to 5% of the spirit run, you don't really want to put that into a cask because it's highly volatile, even dangerous to drink, and kill people and make them go blind. And at the tail end of the run, another 5 or 10%, whatever your cut is, at what point, helps you determine the quality, I guess, that you're going for, the character, flavour and style, because how oily you want your heart, the middle 80 to 90% to be.
Yeah, the cuts form a huge part of the difference in character from one whisky to another. You could keep all the other parameters the same, and there are many other parameters that make one whisky different to another, but the cuts are quite crucial, and really that's where I guess individual distillers feel they can really put their stamp on their particular style of whisky. So most whisky is just double distilled, which is the traditional Scottish way, and many other whiskies around the world are just double distilled. But doing the triple distilled, the smoother Irish style, was our point of difference. It sort of harked to our Irish ancestry. I've got Irish ancestors. My wife Madeline's got Irish ancestors. And one of the other points I was going to make is if you're going to do something business-wise, do something where your passion is. Our passion was for the Irish style whisky rather than the Scots style whisky as well. And we wanted to see what would happen if we created a triple distilled whisky in the Tasmanian environment using Tasmanian barley, and we were very happy with it. We then went through a few other phases of our business, and we've found ourselves back here in a new phase. We're calling ourselves Town Distillery. We're just started to lay down barrels of whisky. We're doing an even more full-on Irish style now, doing single pot still style, which is the main difference there is whilst it's still triple distilled, the difference is in the mash bill. So for Irish traditional pot still whisky, not all the barley that goes into the mash to make that that beer you're talking about, not all the barley has been malted. Some of it is unmalted, and you can also put in a small amount of a third grain. So
what's the ratio? Up to 70% has to be...
in Ireland, legally, to call it Irish single pot still whisky, you have to have at least 30% unmalted barley, at least 30% malted barley, and up to 5% of a third grain. So we're not technically limited to that because we're not saying it's Irish pot still whisky. We're in fact saying it's Tasmanian pot still whisky, but we're nevertheless sticking within those parameters for our mash bill.
And a fun fact, because you're not using 100% malted barley, it can't technically be called a single malt.
Yeah, it is not single malt whisky.
Yeah. It's a very confusing industry, isn't it? A lot of terms. It took me a long time to swat up when I joined the industry. Yeah.
No, that's absolutely right. So our labels, when we release our first whisky in maybe 3 years' time, will not be called single malt whisky. Yeah. No, it'll be pot still whisky.
So you started with a 300 litre still. You've now got a 700 litre still. Let's talk about how you started out, because you've been a town planner for decades now.
Yes, well, even before my town planning career, I was a land surveyor back in the early 1990s.
Bit of a theme there with Bill Lark,
well,
being a surveyor as well.
That is sort of the connection I have, because in the early 1990s, I found myself working part-time for Bill Lark as a surveyor. And I remember he was always talking about this idea that Tasmania has got the perfect environment for great whisky, and there should be a whisky industry here. And I remember drawing up survey plans in his basement office of his house, and over in the corner was this little copper pot still bubbling away. And I just thought it was great. He was exactly right. Tasmania originally did have a whisky industry in the early colonial days, and we have the perfect environment for making great whisky, different whisky to what happens in the Northern Hemisphere because of our climate and so on, but very much great whisky. And I eventually became a town planner, worked in local government, had some state government roles as well for a while. And then I think about the year 2004, I thought, I've got to do something different. So in my spare time, decided to start our first business making whisky, a very long-term business plan if you're going to make whisky. And I had always kept in touch with Bill. So Bill was fantastic in mentoring me and providing me with training and advice on how to make good whisky. And as many of your listeners would know, Bill is considered the godfather of the Australian distilling industry, and certainly the Tasmanian distilling industry. And he started the first ones. He went and got the federal government to change the act to enable small distilleries to start.
Yeah, 1991, that's right.
And he was very free and giving of advice because, as he kept on saying, a rising tide floats all boats.
That's one of his great sayings. It's a hallmark of Bill's generosity. The reason we've now got around 300 craft or independent distilleries in Australia is because he helped so many of them, not just here in Tasmania, obviously, but on the mainland as well. Very helpful.
Yeah, so me going to them in the sort of mid-2000s, getting a lot of advice, it was fantastic. And you're right, the industry wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. His attitude always was that we deserve to have an industry here. 1 or 2 distilleries who are keeping their secrets to themselves and putting walls up would not make an industry. And I think it's largely because, or perhaps 100% because of Bill's early attitude, that there is a great collegiate atmosphere within the Tasmanian distilling community. Everyone talks to each other, helps each other. It's fantastic. So that's definitely one of my tips for anyone wanting to start any sort of a business, is try and find a really good mentor.
Definitely.
Who's happy to mentor you. And no matter how much research and knowledge you think you've got, you never know it all.
Yes.
Always feel that there's more to learn. Anyway, Troy, we developed up the Mackey Whisky brand, and then in about 2013 or thereabouts, 2014, after several years of discussion, we went into partnership with David and Ann Kernke out at Sheena Estate, who had a tourism business out there, and we combined forces and we helped create Sheena Distillery with them.
It's a big, beautiful old colonial sandstone estate that they've been slowly restoring the last 10 years.
Yes, yeah, they've done a fantastic job on the restoration, and now there's a very sizable distillery there. So we were involved there for about 4 years, helped build it from no distillery to a very substantial distillery. And then after about 4 years, we felt the time was right to move on. So we moved on, and after a bit of toing and froing about what we would do, we ended up deciding to come back here and set up again, but at a bigger scale. I really feel that in the distilling industry, there's a couple of sweet spots. There's very small and craft, where it's really just the family.
Bit of a hobby.
I think it can be more than a hobby at that scale, especially if you're making whiskey. Once you've got enough spirit down in barrels and they're starting to come on and be released to market, I think it can provide a good living for, say, a couple who are running at that small scale. But producing high quality, it's got to be high quality, so you can maintain a high price point and you can do most of the marketing and sales and distribution yourself. Then I think there's another sweet spot at a much larger scale where you're getting third-party, distributors going to Dan Murphy and that sort of stuff. You need a much bigger scale to be able to achieve a lower price point, still make a good profit. You're getting a cheaper price point because you're handing over a lot to the middlemen. And so you're either small and very craft, high end, where you're doing a lot of the work yourself and getting a lot of the whole retail margin yourself, or you skip a whole lot of sizes and jump up to quite a larger size where you can afford to pay distributors.
Yeah. I think your journey is quite interesting because you started off in that smaller scale you just spoke of, and then obviously partnering up, you went for the bigger scale, and now you're back again to the smaller scale.
Yeah, and we're very happy where we are. Coming back to the smaller scale, I've gone back part-time in local government land doing planning work there. Madeline is part-time teaching. So in this phase of our third and latest iteration of our distilling journey, we're in the phase of laying down barrels. We've got a bunch behind us that we've been laying down since February.
We've got some 20s and 100s there?
Yeah, the 20s actually belong to someone else. The smallest ones we've got are 30s.
Right.
They're in the cellar beneath us.
The old swimming pool, yes.
Yeah. 80% of our spirit goes into hundreds. And so that's 5 or 6 years of aging. We have got some 30s downstairs, as I said. They'll be released in about 3 years' time as a sort of a taster, just to start getting our product out there in the market. But we envisage we won't be able to give up our day jobs until we've got our hundreds really coming out, and lots of releasing going on there. So that's the phase we're in. We're trying to get down as many barrels as we can. Yep. An interesting thing that a lot of people talk about when starting a whisky distillery is this idea of releasing gin.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about because you also developed and launched the award-winning Poltergeist gin.
Yes, so that when we first started back in the mid-2000s, I spent a lot of time experimenting with making a gin, but at that stage my passion was really for the whiskey, so we just really laid down whiskey barrels. But in between time, as a young distiller enthusiastic might do, you're playing around with redistilling botanicals and steeping botanicals, and so I had a whole lot of experimentation then. When we had made the decision to go in with Sheena, we knew that we had to get a gin product so that we could get some significant income, cash flow coming back. So we basically spent 6 months intensively finalising gin recipe, and I remember when Poltergeist was launched, a new gin was a big deal back then. Yeah. We really rode a wave of new craft gins that were coming out, and there was a lot of excitement amongst the gin-loving fraternity out there about a new craft gin coming onto the market. When we came back to our current business, which we really made the final decisions on to start probably 18 months ago, we initially were very keen on doing another craft gin to get some cash flow. And in fact, I've got half a recipe developed now. But then later on last year, towards the end of last year, we decided not to go ahead with it.
What was the main reason for that?
The main reason was that every time we turned around, there was another craft gin coming on the market.
I think there's 600 Australian gins at the moment.
Yeah, it's amazing. And there's so many more coming in from overseas as well. So we thought we've got a choice of developing another craft gin and had to do something different, always have a point of difference. Trying to squeeze another craft gin into a very crowded market.
Yep.
We would have spent a significant amount of our resources on bringing that product to market. All the marketing and sales effort you've got to put in, and it would have chewed up a lot of our money, and we just weren't sure it was going to really be worth it. Maybe it would have been a fantastic award-winning gold medal gin, and maybe it would have been worth it, but maybe it wouldn't have.
Divides not just your resources resources as in time and cash, but also your focus and your passion and your energy as well.
Yeah, exactly. So we thought our passion really is for the whiskey.
Yep.
And we're very excited about this pot still whiskey that we're making now.
Because there'll be no one else in Australia doing that pot style.
That's right. Yeah, we are partnering with one other person to laying down some barrels for that person as well. The good thing about pot still whiskey is because you start playing around with the mash bill, it's no longer 100% malted barley. You immediately open up a whole new area to create different expressions of pot still whiskey by varying the percentages of barley, unmalted barley, and the third grain. So it's really an exciting field, and I'm trying to encourage as many other distillers as I come across to think about putting down a few barrels of pot still whiskey and have their own pot still brand, because I'd love to see Tasmanian pot still whiskey become a real category in the future. Yeah. And yes, you do have to triple distill it. You do have to muck around with mashing in different grains and things, which all adds a bit more complexity to the mashing and fermenting process. But I think it's worth it in terms of creating a really good point of difference and opening up a whole area for points of difference in terms of the mash bills.
Yep. And this time around, you're not brewing yourself. You're getting your wash in from a craft brewery locally, aren't you?
Yes. So that was a bit of a mental stretch for me to say, okay, let's not do our own mashing and create our own wash. So we had done that before on a very small scale here in our initial establishment here. And of course at Sheena does its own mashing and fermenting. But when we came back here, we wanted to have a bigger production capacity. We had a certain amount of money to contribute to the capital costs of setting everything up. So we made the decision to do what a number of other distilleries do, and that's get a brewer to do our wash. And brewers are very good at that because that is their expertise.
That's their job.
That's their job. Beer and wash are basically the same thing. So we're lucky enough to find Last Rights, who do a lot of wash for other distilleries, and they brought a real lot of excitement to this idea of doing pot still mash bills, playing with other grains and all that. They've been fantastic, and we're very happy with what they're producing. If our business grows and is successful, and in 10 years' time we decide to move out of here and find a new location and get a lot bigger, I dare say I'd love to mash again, because then you're controlling the whole process yourself, and that would be great to do. But at that stage, that's just maybe something that might happen in the future. Yep. Current couple of stages is to firstly get barrels laid down, and then secondly get a product out there.
Yeah, Last Rights are a great craft brewery here in Tasmania. They also make wonderful beers. Well.
Absolutely, yeah. Very passionate brewers out there.
Before we talk about some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth, in 2006 when you started out, how old were you then?
I was, 2007 I think we first turned the still on here, and I would have been 43.
Right.
I think looking back, it was in 2004 when I was turning 40.
Yeah. Oh, right. So quarter life crisis then.
I think that's when I really thought, I want to have another string to my bow. I want to have another light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's when I thought, instead of just thinking about having a distillery, I really think that's when I made a decision to do it. So 2005, I started fitting out the shed here to turn it into a distillery. But it took me a couple of years of just doing occasional weekend work there to get it all up and running. So 2007, we actually turned the still on.
Great. And what about growth? Can you share maybe litres? You're making 200 to 400 litres a year, putting into cask in your original distillery. And then are you able to share kind of what the next chapter was?
Well, really, we only got to just start releasing our whiskey for about a year.
Yep.
And then we ended up taking the great big step and combining with Sheena.
Yep.
So it kind of very quickly moved from a release here to combining with Sheena and going there. And then it was, in one way, starting all over again, although we had some whiskey to release from there as well. I think the last 12 months that the still was here, we were flat out laying down 20-litre barrels so that Sheena could have some releases
stock
early in its life. But of course, everything was much, much bigger at Sheena.
Yeah, I remember going out there when the stills were being installed. They are massive. Yeah, you guys were going hard.
Yeah, so within a space of a couple of years, we went from a 300-litre still here to a wash still out there, which was 4,500 litres.
Wow. I think that was the biggest one in Tasmania at the time.
At the time, yeah. So we had a 4,500 litre wash still. I think it was a 2,500 litre intermediate still, and the final spirit still was 1,100 litres. So it was, and big fermenters. We started off buying barley in bulker bags, and we had an initial configuration out there, and then a third partner came in with money, and everything quickly went to another stage, another size, which is when we got the 4,500 litre wash still.
Got it.
And much bigger fermenters. So the initial fermenters we had out there, I think, were 2,500 litres, but they quickly only lasted for maybe a year or so.
Yep. So, I mean, I could do the numbers, but I haven't had enough coffee today. But what would be the capacity out there at the moment per annum, I guess?
I think there'd be something like 100,000 litres.
Great. So you've gone from 400 litres a year to able to go up to 100,000 litres, and now back down to what?
Well, we're on a fortnightly cycle here in which we can produce 300 litres.
Yeah, so 8,000 litres a year?
Yes.
Great. That's a really interesting journey, Damian.
It's been good. Learn a lot. Yeah, keep on learning. That's what
That's
I say.
right. Yeah. When was the moment you felt like you'd succeeded?
Well, sitting here now, I don't think I've succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
Once we get this up and running and creating a reasonable income for us, and we're giving up our day jobs and both my wife and I and Madeline are full-time working here, I think that's when we'll know we've succeeded. Certainly, these means highlights such as when your whiskey or your gin has won a gold medal in some overseas competition. That gives you...
It was San Francisco, was it?
Yeah.
Spirits Award?
Yeah. The gin, Poltergeist Gin, has been well received there over the years.
Yep.
So that's won double gold 3 years in a row there.
Wow. And that is a phenomenal achievement, by the way, for the audience.
Yeah. Our whiskey's picked up a few gold medals here and there at various competitions. So that's been really pleasing. Yeah, definitely highlights.
Yep, great. And what does success look like to you?
I think it'll be when we're sitting here making 8,000 litres a year and selling 8,000 litres a year.
And don't have to work part-time.
And don't have to work part-time.
Great. The number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Definitely get down a marketing plan.
Mm-hmm.
Someone who knows a lot about this once told me, who does international marketing based in Melbourne, said that whatever your projected revenue is, allocate between 10 and 20% to invest in marketing and sales. Obviously get right on top of internet marketing, get someone who knows what they're doing there, because it's such a powerful tool if you've got someone who really knows what they're doing.
Yep, I think that's a really good piece of advice. Have a percentage of your sales that goes straight into a marketing bucket, and you feel comfortable. It fits in your financial model or your business model. You feel comfortable each year using that as an investment because you're investing in obviously the future of the brand and the expansion of the brand and the sales. I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, I think distillers are naturally creative people.
Yep.
And creative people are not necessarily the best business marketing salespeople.
Yeah.
Really get passionate about making great whiskey. And then this idea that marketing and selling it is 50% of the whole job is a bit hard to get your mind around.
Yes.
But it is 50% of the job, and allocate a decent marketing budget to it.
Just, I guess, this is marketing because one of the 4 Ps, the old traditional 4 Ps, is packaging. I distinctly remember, it would have been 2014, I think, Poltergeist came out, because I distinctly remember when Jane Overeem, who was working with me at the time at Lark, brought one of your bottles in, and I said, oh, for fuck's sake, we've just gone with that bottle, the same bottle. We just put in a giant order overseas with Saberglass, because no one else in Australia was using that beautiful bottle. What was the...
Little Sumo.
Little Sumo. I absolutely love the bottle. It's about 1 kilo when the bottle's empty. And I could not fucking believe it. But there's about 4 gins in Tasmania now using the same bottle.
Yeah, look, we had the same thought at the time. We thought, oh, look at it. Oh, right. Yeah, but it's interesting, that bottle, because a different label
does make a difference.
Makes it look like a different bottle.
It does, because what we were doing at the time, as I mentioned in the marketing cast with Tony Kibbe, who again I worked with at Lark, we were spinning off the Lark gin, which had Bill's face on the bottle, into a separate brand and name, so it was disconnected from Lark Whisky. So I remember that project. It was a lot of fun and hugely successful too.
The other thing I'd say about the Little Sumo bottle is it's not round and it's not square. There's not a right angle on it or anything. Anyway, if you're starting off small...
Labelling's a bitch.
Labelling is a bitch. It won't work in the little hand roller label applier, which is something just we did not think about at the time. If we had have known that, we wouldn't have gone for that Little Sumo bottle. We would have gone just for a round bottle, basically.
I think that's a good point. When you're selecting your packaging, you want to roll it through productions, dummy tests to make sure that you're considering all the implications. I know Ryan Hartshorn from Hartshorn Gin and Vodka, he's got a great vodka made from Sheep's Way, and his bottle is distinctive. He dips it in black paint, I believe, and then hand writes on it. And I said to Ryan years ago, I said, geez, mate, you're really putting a, no pun intended, a bottleneck on your scale of your business if you can't find a way to make this more automated. So I think really thinking about that, depending on how big your plans are to grow, those operational or production issues can creep in and really become pain points.
Yeah. Whiskey bottles were always round, and so putting labels on them is simple and easy.
Yeah.
You put them on the label roller that has a handle that just turns it. The label comes off the roll and goes straight on. But with the Little Sumo bottle, you had to manually apply the front label, the back label, getting it straight and level and even, the same distance up from the bottom every time. It takes a lot of concentration. So the little things like that can trip you up.
Yeah, absolutely. How did you fund your business?
Just with our own savings. When we started off, I suppose that was the other thing I mentioned before that took us 13 or 14 weekends to lay down a 100 litre barrel. One of the restrictions being time with a young family, the other restriction being just being able to afford to do it.
Yeah.
Just funding the raw materials and so on to lay down a barrel of whiskey. So
sit there for 6 years, yeah.
Yeah. So we just funded it as we could. I remember at the time we were extending our mortgage so that we could build an extension on our house, and we
just slipped a distillery in there. Didn't tell the bank.
Yeah. Well, I can't remember what we said to the bank, but we added on a bit more money so that we could fit out the distillery.
Yep.
And after that, it was just lay down barrels as time and money could allow. When we made the decision to go in with Sheena, obviously everything we had created here, not just the physical stuff that we'd created, but the intellectual property as well. We took it all out there. We were lucky enough to get a grant from the state government, but that was like many are, a dollar for dollar basis. So we had to borrow more money at that stage to help make up our share of the other half of the money.
Yeah.
So it was all extra money to borrow and extend the mortgage. And I guess looking back at it all, if I was back in 2004, perhaps I didn't really dawn on me at the time, but what I was doing was making a decision not to just 100% apply myself to the career I was in and work hard to pay off the mortgage. I basically made a decision to say, okay, we're not going to pay off the mortgage quickly because we're going to be putting all our spare money into the business.
Yep.
Hence, that is a significant decision in the life of someone.
Yep. But a good decision. You'd do it again?
Yeah, probably figure out how to go harder. Even, especially back then. And nowadays there are so many, and it's great to see so many distilleries out there, but back then there were few distilleries. And it was still, maybe there was still a question about whether there would be a vibrant distilling industry. I think if back in the early 2000s, if someone had said there'd be 300 craft distilleries in Australia, you would have said, oh my God, that's incredible. It'd be hard to believe. But had I known then how much whiskey, high-end gin would be really loved and appreciated by the public out there, maybe would have figured out how to go harder.
Yeah. Well, 2020 vision in hindsight. I think when you would have started in 2005 or 6, it would have been less than 10 distilleries in Tasmania. There's now 55 to 60 in Tassie.
Yeah.
It's amazing growth.
I remember our early meetings of the Tas Whisky Producers Association. We just fit around one table in Bill's bar down there.
You, Bill, Lark, Patrick McGuire, Mark Littler from Helliers Road.
Casey Overeem.
Wow.
Yeah.
We have all legends of the industry. Yeah. It's good you mentioned grants because I think the state government particularly has been really supportive of the Tasmanian whisky or spirit industry with their grants and the taswhiskytrail.com. Last week I had a webinar for the Distillers Institute with Brett and Ann and my co-founders on that business, and we had Cam and Susie Brett from Spring Bay Distillery on that, and they were saying how the government actually came to them proactively to help get set up on the east coast of Tasmania because there wasn't really much of a tourism attraction over there. So I think the state government has done a wonderful job over the years.
And the more successful the industry is, the more it's attracted support from state and federal government.
Yeah. So this next one might be easy to answer. If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Plenty of funding is the key.
Yeah.
I mean, if you could build a significant size distillery and have the runway to spend 5 or 6 years laying down barrels and not receive a cent back, I'd do that, definitely.
Great. And can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
I guess it was coming to that decision to leave Sheena, which was growing, it was becoming huge, and go back on our own, definitely.
That would have been tough. Yeah.
I mean, there's pros and cons of every decision that you make in life, and coming to that conclusion was a big point for us.
Yeah. And what area in business do you feel you had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
I think business planning.
Yep.
Back in 2004, 5, 6, I spent a lot of time getting template business plans, plugging numbers in, barrels, materials, making assumptions, just that whole idea of getting your head around business planning, and then later on the whole marketing side of it. So I think it's just so important for people to, even if you don't know anything about business planning, just have a go at doing something, getting some numbers down, because whenever you embark on something like this, you do have to make a lot of guesstimates, you have to make a lot of assumptions, and you've got to encapsulate all that in something, in a document. From there, you develop your key performance indicators. How much do you think it will cost me to lay down a barrel? How much do you think I can sell?
Yes.
For what price? And so as you go along, you need to be able to come back to the assumptions and the guesstimates and the key performance indicators in your business plan and continually measure yourself to see how you're going, and always be prepared to amend things, to change things, and things become clearer as you go along. And the only way they become clearer is by getting in and doing it, finding out how things are travelling, and then having that feedback loop to come and refine your business plan further.
Absolutely.
And also you need to know if your idea actually is worth doing right from the start. I know that making high-end spirits is worth doing, but there's lots of other business planning ideas out there, and you really need to know right from the start, and you've got to be honest with yourself, as honest as you can be, making all these assumptions to say, is it worth doing this idea?
Yeah, it's good to have people outside that you bounce ideas off so they can say, no, I don't think that's going to work, or show me the evidence where you've got that assumption from. And also, importantly, as Tony Kibbe mentioned, I think, is testing the market. Is there enough of a demand for what you want to make for it to be viable?
Yeah, you don't want people who are just going to agree with your business plan. You want people who are going to look at it with a critical eye and challenge it.
And not be totally negative, but they need to ask hard questions and the right questions and be supportive.
Absolutely.
And what have you enjoyed least about managing the fast growth?
Yeah, I suppose it's when you're starting off a business, you're doing so much yourself.
Yep, juggling everything.
Yeah, juggling everything. With distilling, it's not the romantic image that many people have of being a distiller, because everyone sees the photo shot of someone leisurely sipping on a glass of amber liquid in comfortable surroundings.
But they don't see you at 4 a.m. like you told us last week, with your thermals on, turning the still on in the shed in your pyjamas and Ugg boots.
Yeah. And the other thing about being a distiller, especially when you're starting off and you're doing everything yourself, a great percentage of your time is spent cleaning things.
Yeah, that's a big one that people just don't realise.
There's a lot of unromantic aspects about it.
Yeah. What's been the biggest mindset shift for you in your journey so far?
I think it was that whole journey of starting off in the small business model and then mind shifting to the big business model, and then mind shifting back to the small business model. That's been mental gymnastics for us, and emotional gymnastics for us as well.
What's the number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
Probably, I think, comes back to, first of all, having a business plan, but then having the habit of revisiting it, measuring yourself, challenging your own assumptions, continually doing that.
Find it hard to define a clear strategy, then communicate it and execute it alongside the rest of your team? Or you currently don't work a simple quarterly strategic plan to boost your team's performance? Our Business Growth Formula online course is perfect for small business owners with 5 to 30 team members wanting to grow. We share the mindsets, habits and tools to be a legendary leader in your business. growsmallbusiness.com. And can you talk about how you've added people to the team? How many FTEs, say, did you get up to out at Sheena?
I think it was about half a dozen, I think, by the time I left. In the whisky industry, you need people with passion for it.
Definitely.
I think. Probably of any industry I can think of, people with passion. If we were setting up 6 million litre a year distilleries like they have in Scotland, I'd say maybe less so. You're really just a giant factory distillery when you get to that stage. But at the craft level, everyone's input ends up coming out in some way, shape or form into the character of that whisky in that bottle. So you want everyone on the same page and everyone loving the idea of being involved in making whisky.
And what are some of the things you recommend of building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Probably that again, getting the right people on. Team building, I suppose. The great thing about being a whisky distillery is
you can stand around and lean against the still and drink whisky.
That's right, Product research, also getting the team on the same page in terms of those cuts we talked about before. Trying to get everyone producing the same character of whisky. And that unfortunately involves standing around tasting some great spirit. I
do remember some mornings at Lark, I'd go out to we called the Shed, which is the distillery 20 minutes out of Hobart where the cellar door is, tasting new make and whiskey at 8 in the morning. Some mornings, that was a long day.
Tough job, but somebody's got to do it.
That's right. They were long days, those ones.
Yeah.
What about professional development? Did you do much to swat up in this area, this new area of learning and distilling?
Back then, there's so much more material out there now, but reading every book you can find about making whisky. I mentioned before getting help from Bill Lark. He was a great mentor in many ways and tutor in the operation of stills. So asking people, finding books and resources. I know there's more and more things online now, like the Distillers Institute is a great example.
Yeah, we've got 90 students in that course now. We're blown away with how well that's gone, launching it only 2 months ago,
That's couldn't be more timely for the Tasmanian whisky industry. So there's so much people can learn from businesses such as yourself set up online.
We've even got a student in Fiji and another one is in America. And I think there's one in New Zealand as well. So it's great.
Fantastic. Fiji, are they going to make rum, surely?
Yes, they are going to make rum. I think there's only one rum distiller in Fiji anyway, so it's great.
Excellent.
What about any other mentors or coaches along the way? Obviously, Bill Lark was a big one. Anyone else you leaned on for advice?
Different people to different degrees. In hindsight, I probably could have asked more people, and I'd just recommend to people to get out there and talk to them. I actually did have one session with a mentor. There's a Tasmanian Mentors organisation.
Yep.
One of my early business plans, perhaps in the mid-2000s, I made contact with the Tasmanian Mentor organisation. I can't recall their actual term now, and had a session with someone who was great. Yes. Reviewed the business plan and gave me fantastic feedback. And in hindsight, I should have kept that contact and got more and more feedback as things evolved. Yep. But, sometimes a bit slack with my human relations. Yep. I'm probably a natural introvert rather than extrovert, so I tend to shrink a bit in myself sometimes, which I shouldn't do.
And what about board of directors or advisors? I assume you don't have one now or in the first iteration of the business, but out at Sheena, did you have a board or?
Yes, that was a company with a board. The shareholders were members of the board.
Yep. Anything else on exiting, Sheena? I guess any advice you'd give to people that are looking at getting out of a business? Similar, I guess.
If you're getting into a partnership, just try and make sure everyone's on the same page. You need to work at that. Mm-hmm. The different partners need to work at that. It's not necessarily everything's going to fall into place naturally. Yep. So be aware that there is extra effort needed to put in.
Yep. And a good mechanism for that, which I've spoken of before, is obviously having a really good shareholders agreement up front, because that, if anything, is an exercise to make everyone get on that same page and say, right, what if someone wants to leave? How are we going to handle that? And you put it all down, obviously, in that legal agreement, and the rules are then written. But it also forces you to discuss the vision, the future, how long everyone wants to be in for, how much time commitment, etc. I mean, that's exactly what we did when we launched the Distillers Institute. I was very big on that point with Brett, Anne and Ian.
Yeah, definitely put the effort in. Don't assume that everyone's thinking the same as you.
Yeah, well, we know what assumptions make of us. Yeah. All right, we're on to our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
I think balancing the resources you plough back into the business. If you can find a business that you can grow while you're still doing a day job, at least that puts food on the table and a roof over your head. Yep. But there's always, I think, that key decisions there to say, well, how much are we going to put back in? In other words, how quickly is this business going to grow? How much can we afford to put back in? How much do we need to take out to live? Can we have another job to help us live? Yeah. Again, it comes back to getting that business plan done and trying to get the answers from thinking through the hard questions through the process of writing a business plan.
Yep. And favourite business book which has helped you the most?
I think I'd go back to those early business plan templates and reading about the whisky industry. Maybe that was another thing I should have done back then in 2004, was go and get some business books as such.
Yeah, I think, I advise a lot of people, even if you don't want to read business books per se, like Richard Branson or other business stories or specific advice on how to start a business, grow a business. If you're going to do anything, I say to people, swat up on marketing. Read more about marketing so you understand the value of it and the difference between advertising and brand and marketing. I think it's a really important knowledge area.
Yep, definitely agree with that. I've come to that realisation later.
So did I.
Because, as we mentioned, you're going to make whiskey, you're going to spend 5 or 6 years just putting it down before you have to get to that point. But then you soon realise that you've only done half the job. Yeah.
Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use?
Well, I think I'd recommend people to go and look at the Irish Whisky podcast.
Oh, cool. Yeah, great. I'll check that one out.
Yeah, definitely have a look at that, because you'll soon learn there that Irish whisky was and will be in the future the best whisky, aside from Tasmanian whisky, I should say, but certainly the style. If you went back 120 years, Irish whisky was the big whisky in the world.
It was the biggest. It was bigger than Scotch, which is whisky made in Scotland. But am I correct in my memory here? Was it the US Prohibition which pretty much killed off the volume of Irish whisky?
Yeah, there was 3 calamities that all created the perfect storm that killed the Irish whisky industry for much of the 20th century. One was Prohibition. Yep. Because America was a huge market for Irish whisky. And it also had another flow-on effect, because a lot of the bootleg whisky that was sold under the table in America during Prohibition was called Irish whiskey, but it was crap. and when America woke up and came out of Prohibition, a lot of people just had an experience of horrible whiskey as Irish whiskey.
So it tainted the brand of Irish.
It tainted the brand. The other thing is that the Irish Republic had been just created when Prohibition in America started, and then there was a trade war between the Irish Republic and the British Empire, which was 1/4 of the world's economy.
Wow.
So there was a couple of years there when no Irish whiskey could be basically sold. It was very difficult to be sold to the British Empire. So that coincided with Prohibition in America.
Yep.
So there's pretty much all your markets gone. And then the other thing...
Sorry, and the Scots swooped in to fill that void.
That's right. So the other thing was the Irish refused to take on the coffee still,
right.
the column still. They basically said any whiskey made in one of these stills is the devil's work and should not be called whiskey. But the Scots, the canny Scots, of course, took it on board. And for those who don't know, that the coffee still is a kind of a column still which can make high-strength alcohol very quickly.
And pretty much continuously.
Yeah. Continuously. It's not very good. But then the Scots figured out that you could make a lot of spirit in coffee stills, blend it with a bit of good spirit made from proper copper pot stills.
Copper pot batch distilling.
Batch distilling. Yeah. And they basically created blended Scotch whisky, which is Johnny Walker Red and Chivas Regal and all the cheap blended Scotch whiskies that everyone's kind of grown up with sitting on the shelf behind the bar.
92% of the whiskies in the world are blends. There's only about 8% that are single malt.
Yeah.
By volume.
When America came out of Prohibition, the Scots were standing ready to flood the market with much cheaper whiskey.
Got it.
And I think Ireland went from something like 100 distilleries to 3
I think
in a few decades.
I think that they came close to surpassing Tasmania a few years ago, potentially having more distilleries in Ireland than Tasmania, but I think there's only, 20 there now?
No, I think there's more like 40. We were over there at the end of last year and people were telling us there's about 40. That probably included those in production and those in the pipeline.
Yeah. Well, there's like nearly 60 here in Tassie, so there's still got a bit of catching up to do.
The great thing about going around, we were there 10 years ago, and there was just 3, like there had been for decades.
Yeah.
Anyway, we went back at the end of last year, just before COVID-19 shut down everything, and it just reminded me of Tasmania because, yes, there are some bigger distilleries, quite a few bigger distilleries with particularly a lot of American money coming in and setting those up, resurrecting old brands, but there was also a lot of very small craft distilleries set up by single people in their smallest sheds, and just reminded me so much of a lot of the Tasmanian craft distilling businesses and how they've got going.
Yeah, absolutely. One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
Get that business plan done and treat it as a living document.
Yep, great advice. Final and my favourite question, what would you tell yourself on day one of starting out?
I'd say make sure you're doing something that you are passionate about because, and try and get that point of difference. We've always tried to do that with our initial Mackeys being the only triple distilled around, and now we're doing this Tasmanian pot still style, and the gin that we half developed but didn't go ahead with that had its own unique aspect. Maybe we'll pick that up again and go back there, but do something you're passionate about, because when you're starting a business, there's going to be a lot of hard times and a lot of challenging times, and I think if you're passionate about it, that might be the only thing that keeps you going at times.
I agree, totally. Well, thanks for your time today, Damian. I think the audience got a shit ton of value out of what you shared with us. I think you had a really exciting and interesting journey and some great successes and wins along the way.
Thanks very much, Troy. It's been great. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks. That's it. Thanks for listening. Please leave a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. It means more small business owners will find our cast and help people with their business growth journey. We'll have all the show notes and any resources mentioned in the cast on our website. In 2005, started building a small distillery in his backyard in Hobart. 2007, filled their first cask with triple distilled Irish-style single malt whisky, which has matured 5 years later. In 2014, partnered with Sheena Estate, moved, launched an award-winning gin, took on investment and went from using a single 300-litre still at home to a 4,500 litre and 2 smaller stills. Grew from laying down 400 litres a year at home to around 100,000 litres, and recently sold out of the larger business to return to distilling at home. Now with a single 700 litre still, making about 8,000 litres a year. Damian recommends investing 10 to 20% of sales into marketing and find an expert to work with. Went from 1 FTE to 6 back to 1. Business and financial planning using KPIs, ensuring you're well funded, and getting and keeping mentors are crucial to success. He believes the hardest thing in growing a small business is balancing the resources you plough back into the business. Advice Damian would give himself on day one is make sure you're doing something you're passionate about, is unique, and has a point of difference.